Hey,
Dude, what are you doing on my porch?
have you heard what's happening? You're telling me you haven't heard about one of the biggest environmental issues that has been affecting Indianapolis for decades? Have a seat. Let me tell you about it. This is a problem that has repeatedly been a main contributor to hundreds of cases of sickness in humans and wildlife alike. A problem that has ravaged poor, predominantly black communities and has yet to be resolved. What you see here isn't simply a peaceful body of water that stretches through Indianapolis and her surrounding areas. It's a crime scene. On average, Indiana sees around 200 thunderstorms annually, according to a study by Stephen Vischer at Indiana University. During these storms, Indianapolis's old sewer systems become overwhelmed, causing combined sewer overflows, or CSOs. CSOs cause human waste from homes and businesses to be discharged into the White River. A bacterial level of 1,000 per 100 millimeters is considered hazardous. During Indianapolis's wet weather episodes, the White River reaches a bacterial level of 10,000 per 100 milliliters. You need to understand how these catastrophic levels of bacteria even came to be. I mean, how has no one done anything about this? As it turns out, there have been steps taken to try and resolve this issue. I've done my fair share of research, but let's consult someone with environmental expertise. So, who knows more about the contamination of the White River more than anybody?
That the EPA brought in action in the early 2000s under the Clean Water Act, right? And so that is what's kind of controlling discharges into water bodies like the White River, right? And so if you're discharging, you typically will have a what's called an NPDES permit that allows you and provides certain limits to how you discharge, right? And limits on the contaminants that can be in what you discharge to make sure you're not, contributing too much to the river. The issue is that, of course, we wound up collecting so much wastewater and stormwater that, the number of combined sewer overflows that happened were getting too high, right? And so then you start to get this problem, right? And so that's the suit that was brought under the Clean Water Act, and basically arguing that there were violations of the NPDES permits, and that resulted in the consent decree in 2006 that's been modified a couple of times. I think the last time, or maybe three times. The last time, like 2013, and that's what then leads you to this Dig Indy project, right? Okay. Which is effectively creating this huge additional, like instead of overflowing as much into the White River or Fall Creek, it's now discharging into this huge 18-foot diameter tunnel under the ground. Yeah.
So, the Dig Indy project seems to have made outstanding strides to managing the sewage discharge into the White River. But the question is, who's paying for it? It sure isn't the government or insurance. This is one of the biggest hurdles to solving this issue. Who should pay to clean up the mess when there are multiple polluters over several decades? A lot of the initial contamination of the White River comes from chemicals like mercury that were discharged from factories more than 40 years ago when there weren't as many environmental safety laws. Most of these factories closed in the 1980s and 90s, and yet mercury and other factory contaminants can still be found in the water and soil of the White River today. So, how do you legally prove that the current contaminants found in the river are caused by today's sewage and not yesterday's industrial waste?
Under federal and state law, if you can tie a particular sort of contribute, you can tie a pollution source, an ongoing pollution source, so the mercury, right? You can tie that back to a business, and there is still some viable assets for that business. You can go after them under a federal law called CERCLA. You can go back and recover costs that you spend to do the cleanup from someone who caused or contributed to that contamination. The insurance that I mentioned is only available for the cleanups. It's not available for the capital improvement projects. So it's an interesting dichotomy there.
It's evident that there needs to be a better allocation of governmental and insurance funds towards capital improvement projects organized by firms that are interested in improving the technology used to prevent CSOs from happening in the first place. That way, there won't be any need for government subsidized cleanups because there won't be anything to clean up. However, getting environmental firms that are interested in these necessary technological advances funding is easier said than done. Most of the permits given to cities and their companies are based on weather data from the 70s. Due to climate change, we're now seeing heavier rain and worse storms than ever. The law is still using old data for its capital improvement projects, while Mother Nature as we know it is throwing a temper tantrum.
You've identified a real problem that we've run into, right? With the fact that we are using old weather data, and there's no doubt that when what you talk about, so much of it's based on are these things called like 100-year flood events, right? And things, right? Exactly. So um, that data is all outdated at this point, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it. And so we do have the issue where we're getting wetter, more intense weather that's coming through. So it's certainly a factor that is needing to be accounted for, that I don't think is fully accounted for in the system currently.
The constant thunderstorms, the lack of funding, and the old weather data are logistical details that have been ignored for years at this point. This is because more affluent areas don't experience the detriments that the contamination of the White River induces. The dirty water is diverted from areas that can afford to ignore the problem and poured into poor communities that can't afford to stand up for themselves. This turns the filtering of bacterial wastewater into a social justice issue.
As part of that EPA suit, one of the focuses was an environmental justice angle as well, because what you had was you had some prior projects that had happened, I believe, on the north side, like a north side um, diversion project. I think that diverted waste water away from more affluent areas like the Broad Ripple area, for example, down to Fall Creek, which is why Fall Creek became a major problem. Fall Creek, more of a black, poor area, and so effectively the city had pushed more of the problems down into that area, right? And so there was definitely an environmental justice angle when EPA came in the 2000s to say, look, there's a problem that you need to deal with, right?
The NPDES and government funded actions toward cleaner water in the White River have helped to hold the city of Indianapolis accountable for the contaminated discharge. But that just helps to control adding more pollution to irreversibly polluted water. This is a good thing, obviously, but the river still faces upwards of 20 times the hazardous limits for contaminants. This won't change unless we do something. I'll leave you with this. You can join the White River Alliance today to participate in cleanup events and to advocate for further technological innovation that will help lessen the impact of contaminated water in less affluent communities that surround Indianapolis. Let's serve our city so that the White River can go back to be what it should, a beautiful landmark of Indiana that serves as a functional, recreational example of the benefits of clean water. Capital improvement projects, while Mother Nature, as we know it, is throwing a tantrum. I said tantrum. I said tantrum.
Was that the last word?
Yes.
Oh,
All right, we're good.
next one.
At least we know we can do it.